The Black Death, how Europe nearly disappeared. At the beginning of the 14th century, Europe was experiencing a period of growth that seemed promising. Cities were expanding, trade was strengthening, and the population was steadily increasing after centuries of medieval hardship. There was famine in some regions, occasional wars and deep inequality, but overall many believed the continent was slowly moving toward better days. No one imagined that within a few years, an invisible catastrophe would appear on the horizon and plunge all of Europe into one of the darkest periods in human history. This catastrophe would become known as the Black Death. The disease did not begin in Europe. Historical studies indicate that it likely originated in regions of Central Asia, where the bacterium Yersinia pestis circulated among wild rodents. During the 14th century, intense trade routes connected the east to the west through the famous Silk Road. Caravans, merchants, soldiers, and travelers carried not only silk, spices, and precious metals, but also rats infested with infected fleas. This is how death began its silent journey toward the European continent. Around 1347, merchant ships arrived at the port of Messina in Sicily. What should have been just another commercial voyage quickly turned into a scene of horror. Many sailors were already dead inside the vessels, and the survivors suffered from extremely high fever, severe weakness, and large dark swellings spread across their bodies, especially in the armpits, groin, and neck. These painful swellings, called buboes, gave their name to the most common form of the disease, the bubonic plague. Fear spread even before any explanation. At that time, no one knew what bacteria were. There were no microscopes, no germ theory of disease, and no scientific understanding of contagion. Explanations ranged from divine punishment to the alignment of the stars, corrupted air, or punishment for human sins. Doctors wore strange clothing with beak-shaped masks filled with aromatic herbs, believing this would protect them from the poisoned air. None of it worked. Some cities tried desperate measures. Ships were forced to wait offshore for days or weeks before docking, an early form of what would later be called quarantine. Fires were lit in the streets to cleanse the air. People carried flowers, perfumes, or vinegar-soaked cloths over their faces. Yet the plague continued to spread, unstoppable and indifferent to human fear. Between 1347 and 1351, the plague swept across Europe with terrifying speed. Starting in Italy, it spread through France, Spain, England, the German regions, Scandinavia, and Eastern Europe. Densely populated cities with narrow streets, open sewage, and a massive presence of rats became perfect environments for transmission. Death came quickly. In many cases, a healthy person would fall ill in the morning and be dead just a few days later. Some even more lethal variants affected the lungs or bloodstream, allowing direct human-to-human transmission and increasing mortality even further. Families watched loved ones die one after another, often without time for prayer, burial rites, or final words. The psychological toll was as severe as the physical one. Chroniclers of the time described streets filled with silence, interrupted only by funeral carts. Many believed the end of the world had arrived. Social bonds weakened as survival instincts took over. Some abandoned even their closest relatives out of terror of infection, while others chose to remain and face death together. The impact was devastating. It is estimated that between 25 and 50 million people died in Europe, close to one-third of the continent's entire population. In certain cities, half the inhabitants vanished within a matter of months. Entire villages were abandoned. Houses stood empty. Church bells rang constantly, announcing funerals that never seemed to end. The very structure of medieval society began to collapse. With so many dead, there were not enough peasants to work the fields. Harvests rotted where they stood. Animals wandered without owners. Trade declined drastically. Workshops closed. In some places, there were not even enough people left to bury the dead, who were placed in mass graves. Fear transformed human behavior. Many fled the cities trying to escape the disease, only to carry it with them into new regions. Others sealed themselves inside their homes. Religious groups marched through the streets whipping themselves, believing that physical suffering could bring divine forgiveness and end the plague. Minorities, especially Jewish communities, were unjustly accused of poisoning wells, leading to violent persecution and massacres. It was a time of absolute despair. Yet history rarely moves in only one direction. Amid the darkness, profound changes began to emerge. The enormous population loss altered Europe's economic balance. Surviving workers became scarce, giving them unprecedented bargaining power. Wages began to rise. Serfs started leaving feudal lands in search of better conditions. Laws attempting to freeze salaries revealed how deeply society was shifting. Without realizing it, Europe was beginning a transformation that centuries later would contribute to the rise of the Renaissance, the growth of cities, the strengthening of commerce, and the birth of the modern world. Art, philosophy, and science would eventually flourish in a continent reshaped by tragedy. The tragedy opened the path to change. Around 1351, the first great wave of the plague began to subside. The exact reasons are still debated, but factors such as natural isolation of populations, the death of infected hosts, seasonal changes, and partial immunity among survivors may have contributed. However, the disease did not disappear completely. New outbreaks would return repeatedly over the following centuries, haunting Europe like a recurring shadow, although none would reach the same catastrophic scale as the 14th century pandemic. Even when death retreated, its marks remained. Landscapes once full of life became silent. Farmland reverted to forest. Social, religious, and economic structures were deeply shaken. The collective experience of suffering changed how people viewed life, death, faith, and the future itself. Literature and art grew more concerned with mortality, memory, and the fleeting nature of existence. The Black Death was not merely an epidemic, it was a turning point in human history. It demonstrated the fragility of civilizations in the face of invisible forces. It revealed how trade routes could connect continents not only through wealth, but also through disease. It showed that microscopic biological events can redefine entire political, economic, and cultural systems. And paradoxically, it also revealed humanity's capacity to adapt. From one of the darkest periods in European history emerged transformations that would help shape the world we know today. The pain was immense, the loss incalculable, yet society endured, different, scarred, but alive. Centuries later, the memory of the Black Death still echoes as a silent reminder that human progress is never guaranteed, and that even in the face of the greatest tragedies, history continues to move forward.